name is Patrick Kamau. I'm head of design and tech at Octagon Data Systems, where we design enterprise resource planning systems as well as women solutions for farmers in and around the farm gate.
Fantastic. We're in the studio, so ladies and gentlemen, I want you to put your hands together before we start this conversation. It's going to be a quick fire conversation. We're just going to go 1, 2, 3. That is our club. 1, 2, 3. Okay, in 3, 2, 1. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. Officially, welcome to our conversation here at this fantastic panel. Let me start with you, Dr. Maina. I want you to speak from within and then paint a picture outside. When it comes to the use of data, could you tell us what the ministry is in just 2 minutes and what we do expect to see from the ministry in terms of utilization of data, therefore, to rely on the critical decisions that we have for this critical sector that we do know is the biggest contributor to Kenya's GDP?
Thank you. Right now, the Ministry of Agriculture has a sort of secretariat that deals with all the data in the country. But the challenge we have is that, like before devolution,
yes,
in 2003, where we had control of the whole country, we used to get data monthly, and we could easily go back to the districts or the provinces where the data was not coming. But since devolution in 2013, we had a lot of challenge where getting data from the counties was almost just getting about half of the counties. So it's like there are times even the validated figures for production, we wondered why they were dropping almost by half.
yes.
So that is the time we decided to form the data secretariat to try and get data. But now the problem is that we only get data of what we can get, but we cannot verify. So I think this initiative that was voted last year, where we can try to form a think tank where we can get all stakeholders to give us information on the data they have. I think it will be a way of having a one point where any willing stakeholder, we can share data and then can be validated from their end, so that once we are collaborating with the counties like the CEC Muranga is here,
Yes.
they know we are working together, so that it's not like an order from the ministry reporters to give us this data, but they know it's for benefit of all of us.
Pretty much. I'll be coming back to you on that. For the learners in the building, I just want you to hold your thoughts a little bit because you form the critical part of the entire of this conversation, of this symposium as well. We've been here, we're talking about data and open data. I want to jump to inclusion. And there is no way then this data is going to make sense if indeed the same people that are working for the farmers are not included in this conversation, and finance and banks are central to that. I want to introduce to the conversation now for Wanyingi Joseph from Equity, who's going to tell us, you, as the head of the dairy department at Equity, what data perspective can you bring in this conversation in terms of including the farmers in finance? Access that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very excited to be in this forum where discussing how to gather data,
yes,
analyze data. And I think the first part that comes out of it is collecting the data. And it's through collection of the data that you actually get it so that you're able to analyze it and use it. And in decisioning for the bank, it's about data. Banks have previously relied mainly on financial data and people who have kept data. But when it comes to agriculture, we know farmers are not keeping data. So I think the conversation that has gone here of converting data or data systems into a service, I think that's how it's going to engage the farmers.
Yes.
So that, yeah.
From that perspective, would you say that you've been lacking this data to inform the bank on what decisions they would like to make in that particular aspect of farming?
Yeah, and what happened then, banking did not support agriculture because there was no data. So now when there is data, then the banking or the financial industry can now support the farmers. So data generation, predictions, non-financial data is now critical. And,
Yes. Just before I cross over to the next speaker, Joseph, they're here, they're listening to you. You as a bank, because we've been talking about data doesn't make sense for the farmer, doesn't make sense for the end user. What they're looking for is the service. What sort of data would you want them to present to you? Because if they're here, they're the ones who are going to make that data for them to say, yes, we've given the service, the financial service to the farmer.
I think what has been discussed the whole day is basically because currently non-financial data is being used for, the machine learning, AI.
Yes.
It's able to score and give credit. So we've talked about weather data, we've talked about weather patterns, talked about productivity at the farm level. So I think for the bank right now, there's no choosing which data.
Yes.
We need all the data, and so that we'll be able to make the right decisions, not to make decisions that are not well informed. Because sometimes you make decisions based on little data. So right now, as a financial institution, all the data and the support from the data banks is critical for us to support the agriculture sector.
Pretty much. Brilliant. And Brian, I know I'm jumping you and you're going to see that. Let me cross over to Prof. Prof, you're going to be, and I kept on saying the litmus to this conversation. Because then you come from a very critical perspective. We do know that agriculture is now heavily devolved to the counties, and your ministry is tasked with working directly with the farmers. And you've been in this entire system. Could you give us an outlook or take us back to what indeed has happened in your county as regards data use for decision making?
Thank you very much, Simba. I would say that agriculture, since devolution, suffered one major challenge. Researchers are sitting at the national government level. And research institutions, as we are doing now, sit actually at the national government level. If you asked ERI to give you data about what happened today, they can't, because the link between them and the farmers was the extension system. The extension system was fractured the minute the new constitution was formulated, and we created the fourth schedule that said agriculture is devolved and the national government is in charge of research, policy, and training. So when you go to the grassroots, the knowledge that used to come with an extension officer died. And there is no way you can generate that without having to employ. And without funding to the agricultural sector, the county governments didn't have to man agriculture. So what did they do? The few extension officers that used to be there were promoted to occupy offices, not to go to the farms. So in a sense, we have not had any extension service that has been, and even the funding doesn't exist. So what has therefore been happening? Programs and projects of outsiders, programs of donors, non-government organizations, and people who are selling inputs, converting themselves to knowledgeable individuals, even if their only knowledge is shopkeeping. They became the people that the farmer will have to rely on.
Yes.
So the challenge, therefore, we have is we have farmers who are aged, because when you don't have any output coming from the farm, the potential for you to retain those young people who are graduating is not there. So only the old and productive generation, owners of the land, has been left there. If you go to the farms now, what you will find are bushes. any commodity that we actually use to produce isn't there. So there is a paradigm shift now, and the collaborative engagement that there is now with programs of the government, university institutions, agricultural training centers, because the government is now focusing very heavily on agricultural training colleges. So we now have the feeling, because of the focus that particularly the current government has on the bottom-up agenda, is going to work. And it was not possible before to actually have the intergovernmental framework that was created in agriculture called the Joint Agricultural Sector Steering Committee,
yes,
having its impact on the grassroots. What has happened since the last elections? Some of us who actually have been wailing that we don't have any access to making changes in the grassroots decided that we must go to the grassroots. Right now, as we speak, I sit as the CEC for agriculture, but I don't sit there alone. I'm part of a great team of CECs across the country that have committed themselves to now changing the model of working. So we have created what we are calling County Agribusiness Sector Steering Committee. And that is going to be the pathway or the gateway of all the interventions that are headed to the grassroots, so that we can now say we need this level of capacity in this county. It is going to be delivered this way, and the support from our development partners is now coming. When you actually look at how we have structured the interventions that the Department of Research and Innovation has come up with for the purpose of data sourcing,
yes,
we have said that there is going to be one working group that is purely going to be driven purely by the people who are in the agricultural research and development partners, the so-called donors. These days they are called development partners. So the development partners are going to be having one working group, and they are going to be sitting with the researchers in these forums, and or the various working groups that we have created there. And everybody here will actually now be working together, so that all the challenges that the CEC caucus is facing is not going to be just driven to our development partners without having to converge and engage Maina as the head of research,
yes,
and innovation, and the secretary that he is part of. And we will now be driven by what is coming from here. And we are happy that we are in a CGIL organization during the launch of this initiative.
Yes.
And we will actually be working with everyone, and it will be very heavily driven by the caucus of CECs that we now have formalized this week.
Pretty much. I'll be coming back to you then on the particular role or the entire feeling on what the COG really has in terms of helping you achieve this. I know when we were in studio last time we spoke about it, but then today you've got a bigger audience than to tell. I want to jump the lady in the studio again, just because of a particular reason. We do have Octagon in house. We're going to tell us exactly where all this meets. We might have people on the set. We don't understand why they're here. We don't understand why I've been called to this particular symposium. Could you then just explain to them how all of this conversation gets a confluence?
Right, thank you, Simba. So essentially, we've seen a bunch of presentations given to us by professionals in every field,
yes,
from climate all the way to data science, and even up to and including health professionals who have come with amounts of data that they themselves have tried to gather over the years, but have been going through certain bottlenecks and bureaucracies that would otherwise hinder them from getting it today. So essentially what we come in as Octagon to do is create a stable platform that allows for cohesive and very collaborative way, so they can otherwise get this data down to research organizations such as Egerton University and other consumer insight companies like these guys called AfriConverse.
yes, yes.
AfriConverse, who are here giving us consumer insights, can now begin to create a bit of context around what they're gathering, and even spread that into now getting food to consumers who may not have it at the time. Like we had Pilat in Nyandarua at one point. Why couldn't that be spread to areas where there was farming being experienced? Such use cases for the data
Yes. Patrick, is that an official call for them to walk to Octagon so they can make sense of the data that they have?
Certainly, certainly. We have a room, we have a conference room that's waiting for them, and we are waiting to host you and design and create this repository that we can all share and guide the agenda going forward.
Fantastic. I'll be coming back to you on exactly what that then would mean. I know I've not spoken to the lawyers for a very particular reason, but they're going to call this conversation. For the sake of this conversation now, everybody's talking about data, but we do have technology conversations in data as well. But you'll be surprised that 2G tech is still a thing that we have to talk about for those of us who understand data. So now, let me introduce the lady in the studio then to talk to us about why 2G conversations are important now when everybody's talking about for better data gathering, go 5G, go big tech. Could you introduce this conversation for 2G for any other person who's going to tell you, well, stop, talk about 5G?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, we do have 90% of Africa that is still using 2G data. I know we do have, currently from the data that we've gathered online, we have more than half of Africa covered by 4G technology, but then at the same time, it's only 10% of the population that's using 4G technology. So how do we get to include the 90% that is yet to get to 4G technology, 5G technology, and whatnot into this conversation in development? How do we harness that potential? And I think that is where Africa's Talking as an organization comes into play. We have different APIs. We have USSD APIs, we have SMS APIs across 20 African markets, and this is how we are able to get to the grassroots, get data, gather data from farmers in the grassroots levels, people who are not connected to the internet. And I think that is where Africa's Talking as a platform is relevant in this conversation. And I think my call to you today, as we are speaking about inclusion, is to consider using our services so that you can get the appropriate data, so that you can design services and products that are farmer-centric.
To what extent do you believe that the majority of this 90% that are still on 2G are cut out from important data, because then majority of these researchers will not like to maybe go 2G as opposed to 4G and 5G?
Well, I think it's inevitable. It depends with your overriding objective as an organization.
Yes.
Are you looking to bring forth solutions that are relevant to the different context in the African market? So that depends with the heart and soul of the different research organizations. It's their call to ensure that they include the farmers at the grassroots level. That's their call.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right. Now, let me just quickly then touch on the gentleman that I've not introduced. I'll be coming back to you as well, so I'll be calling that conversation. Now, the lawyers in the building. Everybody's talking about data, open data. And we do know that in our country, we do have the Data Protection Act. Let me start with your brilliance. And I'm going to start from a very open perspective. How many cases touching on data abuse have you handled? And what makes data open? And for all the researchers in the house now who are going to go heavy on this data, what is it they have to know around open data?
Well, in the issue concerning data protection and cybersecurity, I think I've handled several cases.
Yes.
I've handled several cases. And one thing I have realized is a lot of people are not well exposed to the Data Protection Act, and it is not the only act that protects data. There are other regulations, the Data Protection General Regulations, the Data Protection Enforcement and Handling Regulations, as well as the Data Protection Processing and Processes and Controllers Regulations.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is there a thin line between what is open data and what is not?
Well, it all has to do with the personal data.
Yes.
It cannot be, if it is personal data, it's not open data.
In respect to industries, and let me just even talk about the agricultural sector, brilliant. What makes data personal, if indeed it's going to touch entirely on the sector?
Well, organizations that are collecting data
Yes.
Mostly collect data from human or natural persons.
Yes.
And if every time you're collecting data from natural persons, you have to collect personal data. Now, when it involves personal data, you come within the ambit of the Data Protection Act. And there are regulations that are governing, regulations and laws that are governing personal data for organizations that are collecting such data.
Pretty much. I'll be coming back to you then on exactly how, once you've collected this data, whether it's important then for it to be presented and audited so that you don't cross the line of what is personal or what is open and not. Let me move to the next laying, the building as well. And I want to introduce you with a question then. Do you agree that this area for open data, even as we talk about the importance of data in making decisions, is still not a black and white area, as we like to think?
I would wish to start by saying, over lunch our participant asked me, what does the law say about data?
Yes.
The answer is very simple. You can't remove the person from the data.
I like the way you say the answer is quite simple, and then you say you can't remove the person from the data.
You can't
Yes.
separate the human touch
Yes.
of the data.
Yes.
A presenter said they have data for around 1.6 million farmers. Then you wonder whether consent was obtained from the 1.6. They say data is the new gold. Some say data is the new oil. As lawyers, what the law says is scoop that oil, mine the gold, but responsibly. So then that brings us to issues of consent.
Yes.
Issues of collection. How do you collect it? How do you then control the data? How do you, control means things like cross-border data transfers. How do you process the data? Then how do you retain the data? Once you're done with the data, what do you do with it? None of the participants, rather the presenters, talked to us about what they do with the data. Data is enjoyable. I like interacting with the techies actually. Data is enjoyable and you get better results when it's in high volumes, but how do you deal with the data once you're done with the purpose? Some of the presenters have project-based data approaches. Yeah, so what then happens to the data once you're done with it? These are huge subjects in the EU. In fact, there's a case where Google Spain was taken to court because a guy called Mario Gonzalez, Google had published news about him in their two search engines about a loan he had defaulted sometime in 1998. And 10 years later, the information was still there.
Yes.
Was it relevant? No.
No.
The court agreed with Mario Gonzalez. So what the law says, the law leans towards the data subjects. That is the unfortunate thing about the institutions and the techies in the room. In Kenya, that is the same trajectory we've taken. There's a lady that sued a university. I won't say the name, but it's the sides of Ukambani. So the lady went to court. The university used the image, very nice looking. So they used the image to advertise for computer packages. And they wrote there, we offer these at 7,000. Fine looking lady, looks like she understands computers and all. So of course, people would enroll and everything. So she went to court saying, they didn't seek my consent,
yes,
and they're making money out of it.
Yes.
I want my share. The court agreed. Though the amount was little that she's given, but the court agreed. There's another case in Kenya as well. Employers wanted part of what my colleague termed as personal data as part of what would form the questions for the interview. I would not be afraid to mention the employer, which was Kenya Power, but the court agreed as well that the circular requiring such information was invalid, and an injunction was issued so that those interviews would not take place. So what am I saying? The law leans towards data subject. What am I saying again? Consent, consent, consent.
Pretty much. I think this is the first round now where every other panelist has presented their case. I'll be going back to mine again to get the government perspective. But guess what? We said we are in the studio. There is a free mic at this point that is going to come to you. If you have any other question at this point, before I go back to the panel again, any other person with us here who has a question, there's a mic that is going to come to you. Just raise up your hand, the mic will drop to you, and then our panelists are going to answer your question. We have exactly 5 minutes for that session. Any question? Yes, keep on getting them together. If there's no question, let me go back to you, Dr. Maina, then, so we can further this conversation. I mean, the Nairobi Declaration was just in 2017. Then in between that period up to where we are in 2022, for any other person listening to you, what do you say? But when it comes to data and data use, we've made steps as a country, and especially in the Ministry of Agriculture then, or it's when now we're scratching the tip of the iceberg.
Okay. As I've said, even the creation of we call it the statistics unit in the ministry, is taking action from that. So even what the Caro presented here, because they are part of the ministry. So it's like Caro and the ministry, they have their own data separately, because even most of the things the Caro are presenting here, the ministry has not had access, because we have people just filling the data for the sake of it. So there is a lot of data that is collected in the ministry. Just